Hello, everybody. It's Craig here, and I am joined by the one and only Tom Salinsky. Did I get that right? I've read
You
it
did, yes.
on paper, and then I've mucked up people's names so many times in the
Yes.
past. It's good to know that I got this one. That's a win.
Yeah, scored a
Um,
bullseye.
you're a podcaster, an author, a designer. What else does a man of your talents do?
Playwright,
Playwright. That's a good
uh,
one.
cat fancier, which is appropriate for Red Dwarf.
Of course.
Corporate trainer.
Corporate
No one has
trainer.
one job anymore. Yeah,
Yeah. You're a man of many talents, is what I'm getting.
I try.
You are here to promote your book. Let's mention it up at the top. What's your
Lovely.
book called, and what's it about?
It is called Red Dwarf, Discovering the TV Series. The title may give some clue as to the content. It is a critical analysis of Red Dwarf. It is an episode guide, and it's a behind-the-scenes tour or history. And that being quite a lot of material, after some debate with my publisher, it was agreed that we would split this in two. So this is volume 1, covering the first 6 series, and the remainder, including all the Dave shows and various other apocrypha, novels, unmade episodes, computer games, adverts, and so on, will all be in volume 2.
I've just started it, and I wasn't aware at how much you would dive into it. It is some pretty, I don't want to say intense, but in depth is the word I always use. You can tell that you're really a fan who just
Yeah.
wanted to write about it. It really comes through.
I've tried to make it as readable as possible, but at the same time, I wanted to make this as definitive as I was able without having any special access. There's a little unofficial badge on the front. That's good news for some people, less good news for others. Basically, what it means is I have no special access, but I can be objective.
Yes.
So with something like this, often the same stories get told by multiple people, and then as a writer, you have to try and consider what's the most plausible or readable or publishable version of that story, and just try and synthesize them all, or very occasionally admit that the true story doesn't seem to be known.
Was there, you say about publishable then, is there anything that you wanted to put in but wasn't exactly publishable?
Well, here's the thing, Craig. This is also being published. So if there was something like that, clearly I couldn't tell you what it was.
God, I almost got the scoop. Almost. I've perused, I've done my research, and I know that you are a man of sci-fi. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure this story isn't in any way unique, but I was one of those kids at school who was, figuring out who I was, didn't play football with the other boys, had nothing to say to the girls, but science fiction books were a great way of escaping. And so when my mum would take me to the library, or when I discovered things like Doctor Who and The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy on TV, then I thought I'd found a world I could immerse myself in. And then I found other like-minded people with whom I could compile lists of things and publish fanzines and so on. And I should stress, Craig, very old. So when I'm talking about publishing fanzines, I am talking about copy and paste and printing on Guess Stetner machines, not even photocopiers in some cases.
Wow, putting in the real elbow grease, so to
Exactly, yes. Handcrafted.
Handcrafted. Do you have any of them, or are they all lost to time now?
Do you know what? I actually discovered that the one I contributed most to, a very obscure one, I would imagine over the course of its something like 8 or 9 episode run, maybe fewer than 200 actual editions were ever printed. But it was called International Electromatics, and I did discover 3 editions floating around on the Internet Archive.
Wow.
So not long before I went to see The Happiness Patrol at the BFI, which is a Doctor Who episode from 1988, I was able to find my 16-year-old review of it. And that was a really interesting bit of personal nostalgia, I can tell you. I did basically agree with my 16-year-old self as well. I think he had it right, pretty much.
It's good to know that even back then your tastes were refined, and you just like,
Yes.
yeah, I was onto something good. That was good.
It was.
So was Doctor Who your first big step into sci-fi, would you say, or was there something else?
No, it was Doctor Who. That's been the constant. Even during the wilderness years, I was buying original novels and Big Finish audios and so on. So yeah, that's always been there, and then other things I kind of dipped in and out of. But I also remember from that sort of same era, Blake Seven, the Tripods. That's a real story of a channel losing its nerve because they had this trilogy of books to adapt. Did what most people agree is a pretty bang up job of the first two, and then just went, nah, we'll leave it there. It's a real shame. It's a real shame.
It's
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, obviously. The
obviously,
Day of the
yep.
Triffids. My God, Day of the Triffids scared the life out of me.
So with you, you say that that's where your taste obviously developed. What made you think like this sci-fi stuff is interesting? What was the thing that encapsulated exactly in your brain? Do you feel?
Again, I don't think this is particularly unique to me, but I think if your personal life, and listen, I wasn't in any way traumatized. I had a perfectly lovely childhood, but if you are like struggling to make friends, and so the real world seems a bit confusing or scary, but there's a secret world with its own rules that you can find out all about, whether that's swords and dragons or whether that's spaceships and teleporters. I think there is a kind of power in being the one who understands that world. And I think that's what draws some young people who feel a bit isolated for whatever reason to science fiction. And, without wanting to put too fine a point in it, why you can spot them at conventions.
Do you ever muck around with fantasy at all? Have you gone that way?
Yeah, a little bit. I was very keen on watching Game of Thrones. I was recruited onto a podcast just recently to look at series 2 of House of the Dragon. I made a point of reading The Lord of the Rings before the Peter Jackson movies came out because I'd always struggled. I'd loved The Hobbit when I was a kid, and I'd never got more than halfway through the first of the 6 Lord of the Rings books when I was like 11, 12, 13. Maybe I was too young. But I did reread them in preparation for the movies coming out. They're quite good, I'd say.
Yeah.
They're
That's
not
controversial
bad.
opinion, though.
Yeah, hot take. J.R.R. Tolkien, not bad.
Yeah. It's a shame that Hobbit film trilogy, eh?
That's not quite so successful, is it?
No. I recently watched the third film, and I watched the second film when it came out, and have you seen it before?
Yeah, I think I saw them all at the cinema.
Yeah, so after the second one, that cliffhanger, I was just like, this is a waste of my time. What was I doing
I'm
sitting
out.
here? Yes, and then after a decade later, my partner's like, we should watch them. And I'm like, okay, I will do this for you. So I was able to be dragged back in there.
Did you think the third redeemed the trilogy or not really?
I wouldn't say redeemed. I think if we're going to talk about hot takes, I'm going to do the it didn't need to be 3 films sort of strategy that everyone else implies. I'm looking forward to the next film that comes out. I can't remember what it's called, but I still haven't seen anything of the Amazon TV show yet either. So
I watched the first 2 episodes and I just couldn't get into it.
okay.
I just my attention just kept being distracted. And there's so much TV to watch these days. You've got to make choices.
There is. There's always just too much now. There is always just too much. So when it comes to your prioritizing of current TV shows, then I know that you're a Star Trek sort of man. Are you?
Yes.
Have you consumed all of the Star Trek you can, or so? For instance, I still haven't seen the last couple of seasons of Discovery, or stuff like that. How do you keep up with that stuff?
The only thing I haven't seen is the 2nd season of Prodigy. And I found that first season of Prodigy got better as it went on, but I found it really hard going to begin with. And I think I'm at that same place with season 2. It hasn't quite grabbed me by the throat yet. So I keep thinking, oh yeah, I've got like 18 episodes of Star Trek Prodigy to watch, but maybe I'll watch something else first.
What's been your modern day era Star Trek? What do you think has been the best?
So I'll answer that in a slightly complicated way, which is to say that there is in Star Trek, in Doctor Who, in lots of these fandoms, a certain toxicity. And I think one of the places that comes from is an idea that some chunks of the show are inherently superior or inferior. Whereas what I try to do is look at each version of the show and tried to look for the good while at the same time acknowledging what doesn't work for me in the same way. So I wasn't convinced by Discovery when it started. I thought it was far too keen to be iconoclastic for the sake of it. I thought it had far too much Klingon mythology and folklore, which I always found a bit hard going, and most of it in subtitles, which I just thought was kind of ridiculous. And it took me a really long time to get into it. But there's been some later episodes I've really, really loved. And once again, the more you get to know the characters, the more you get into the world, the easier it kind of goes down. But I did think they really didn't make life easier, either for brand new viewers who'd never watched Star Trek before, or for diehard Star Trek fans, with the way those first few episodes are structured. It really is quite confronting. I haven't gone back and rewatched those. So you mentioned Star Trek, and it might be worth letting people know that the Red Dwarf book was actually written as I was doing a massive Star Trek rewatch, which has also been immortalized in book form. So I'd watched a lot of Next Generation. I'd watched all of the movies. I watched bits and pieces of Deep Space Nine. I watched very little of the original series and none of the animated series. But it occurred to me to wonder, if I wanted to kind of catch myself up, how long would that take? And the answer, it turns out, if you watch an episode a day, you can get from Kirk to Archer in almost exactly 2 years.
Oh,
so
yeah,
that's what I did.
Oh no, does that include the animated stuff as well?
That includes the animated series.
Okay.
So double-length episodes and movies count as one episode for the purposes of this exercise. I started on the 1st of January 2022 and I finished on Christmas Day 2023.
No, so you watched it on Christmas Day too. That is commitment.
Yeah.
I like it.
Absolutely.
So I've enjoyed Lower Decks recently because just the references alone, I think, is enough for hardcore Star Trek fans. And you talk about toxic fandoms and things like that. I divulge in quite a bit of wrestling, and there is lots of toxicity around that as well.
Really?
Can you believe it? Can you believe it?
Well, almost no, because isn't wrestling all pretend?
I mean, I don't want to.
I mean, Star Trek is also pretend. Let's not be.
Yeah, of course.
But it's a different kind of pretend.
Yeah, I would say it's scripted. What's the sort of thing that people get upset about is sort of tribalism. So, if I could compare Star Trek to Star Wars, which is not really a fair comparison, we all know that as cultured men. But people always do that. So there's different brands of wrestling that people just like that sort of thing.
Right. And again, you have to be in one camp or the other. You have to have a view. Otherwise,
of course, you can't just enjoy stuff. You can't just enjoy stuff for the sake of it. What do you think is the way, as a civilization, we get out of toxic fandoms?
Oh Jesus!
There's a question you didn't think
of.
That.
Yeah. No, if I knew that, God, I mean, it's the same old rubbish. We just have to be tolerant of multiple viewpoints. Right? I've got a book here full of my trenchant opinions about episodes of Red Dwarf. A couple of people have said, "Oh, you're quite harsh on some of these episodes," but my feeling is I've got a 5-star rating and I'm going to use all the ratings. It would be a less interesting book if I gave everything 4 or 5 stars. So I think most Red Dwarf is better than a great many other things, but there are episodes I like much more than others. Yeah. So I want to be clear about that. But all I'm doing is like punting opinions into the world. I mean, under no illusions that my opinions are any more correct or definitive than anyone else's. And the point of this book is not to be a final pronouncement on the worth of any of these things. It's what I thought when I watched them. And when I hear someone else say, "I can't believe you gave that such a low rating, I love it," I say, "Great, tell me why you love it." Someone else says, "I can't believe you gave that was such a high rating, I think it's awful." That doesn't strike me quite so well when I say, "Oh, well, tell me your reasons." And they may be well thought out or they may not. But all I've tried to do is be clear about how I arrived at my conclusions, not necessarily ask anyone else to jump on board.
No, and I think that's important. Star Trek does teach us, to be open-minded about other people and their viewpoints. So
yes.
They're onto something there, I think.
They really are.
So I wanted to talk to you about the state of the sci-fi media at this moment in time, and I think before you even do that, you need to think about just so many streaming services and also the prices of these streaming services going up, but at the same time, production companies, it seem to want more sequels and more known brands than go out on something new. So, in your own opinion, what do you think the state of science fiction pop culture is like these days, compared to how it was back those days, I suppose?
Well, these science fiction and fantasy, and if you include it under the same umbrella, especially superhero franchises, are so valuable because everyone's gun shy. And the big problem is with movies is that there no longer seems to be a market for the like $20 to $50 million movie made for grown-ups. So you can get your $100 to $250 million tentpole franchise blockbuster made because there's a decent chance that you'll get a good return on that, and you can get your 1 to 5 million indie drama in which people touch windows while crying because that costs so little money. It's such a small risk. If it picks up a couple of awards, you'll probably get your money back. But no one's going to punt $30 million or $40 million on a movie that doesn't have pre-sold IP, as they call it. And that means that it's really hard for studios to take risks. But of course, we got a lot of these franchises by taking risks. I'm one of many people who went to see Beetlejuice recently. I don't think I liked it as much as many people did, but it's making an awful lot of money. But this is a 30-plus-year-old movie that's being, if you'll pardon the expression, disinterred, brought back to life. And we have this. I really don't think it's very good. This kind of karaoke version of it, but that gets made when other riskier things wouldn't. When a film as risky as Beetlejuice was back in the 80s probably wouldn't get greenlit today, unless you could do it for $1 million. So it is very difficult, and science fiction by its nature tends to be more expensive. There are exceptions. I'm thinking of movies like Moon, for example, which are basically two people talking in a room. So you can do cheaper versions, but basically it means you're going to have some combination of alien spaceships, weightlessness, alien planets, and all of that costs much more money than people talking in rooms does.
I think that is bringing it back to Red Dwarf is what made it so interesting, because back at the beginning you can see these sets are low budget, and eventually the technology caught up with it to a point where now you can see it's fully CGI, to the point where Red Dwarf fans online are arguing like, we want the original, crappy in quotes shots,
Yes.
rather than the rebuffed CG looking ones.
Yeah.
So do you think is that more of a time thing, or is that more of a people just expect more now? Like, you could get away with it back then, but now you need to make it look a bit more flashy, a little bit more pizzazz. What do you think?
I think people do have different standards. I think when TV was being made in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we sort of watched it at home like watching a play. If you're watching Julius Caesar on stage and Caesar gets stabbed, you don't expect fountains of blood. You don't expect to see the knife going in and out. What you expect is what usually happens, which is one actor kind of comes up against the other, hiding the knife from the audience, and the other actor goes, and falls down. And you understand the story that's being told, so you don't mind the fact that it isn't being told very, very realistically. And if you look at not just science fiction shows on television at that time, but kind of any show, even an ordinary sitcom, the shift from video to film whenever they go outside is really noticeable and really breaks the illusion if you let it. But if the characters and the storytelling are good enough, people don't mind. And that kind of isn't true anymore. A younger generation, which hasn't been exposed to that kind of thing, doesn't have the same patience and tolerance, and they want everything to look real. And that's not an unreasonable expectation, and it's much easier now to achieve it. And sometimes it gives you storytelling possibilities that you didn't have without it. It's interesting to watch the first 6 series, which are the ones covered in the first volume of the book, because they do go from, really, it is just a couple of sets, like 4 video effects per episode, and if you're really lucky, some pretty decent model work, but all the same shots recycled over the same episodes, to the 6th series, where they are doing things like having creatures that can transform themselves on camera, and some really ambitious split-screen work with 2 listers sitting side by side playing guitar and so on. So there is a sophistication there. I do think with Red Dwarf in particular, what slightly happens is the sweet spot for me is around about seasons 4 and 5. 6, I think, is when it starts to tip over from a sitcom set in space to space adventures with 4 wacky guys. And that's not quite so interesting to me because the characters start to get lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like Star Trek Series 1, like the fight scenes aren't going to hold up if you have the same
Really
choreography
Yeah.
these days.
That double-fisted punch, which only Captain Kirk has ever done, I think, in the history of the world. Although, actually, as a wrestling enthusiast, maybe that's wrong. Maybe that happens all the time in professional wrestling. I've certainly never seen it in any other TV show or movie.
I don't think a move that dangerous can be performed by anyone other than Captain Kirk, if you
William
ask me.
Shatner, yes.
So with sci-fi these days, then, do you think that the stories and the CG go hand in hand? Like, I'm just curious to know what sort of films that have been released recently that you rate highly, and do you think the story will always thrust no matter what the effects look like? Like you mentioned, two people talking in a room, could be the most interesting story, but people watching films these days might not agree with that sort of sentiment.
There definitely are stories that you can only tell because the technology allows you to. George Lucas couldn't have made Star Wars before 1977, and it was in fact inventing that technology to enable that story to be told. It's the visceral excitement of that final attack on the Death Star is as important as casting Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan Kenobi to give it a bit of proper theatrical heft. Going back even earlier, I'd say the same about 2001, because 2001 is a story about how small man's intelligence is compared to the scale of the universe. If you can't depict the scale of the universe, you can't tell that story. And so you have to do that firstly by having a convincing recreation of early humans, then by having a convincing depiction of what life in the space year 2001 would look like when we were all getting shuttles up to the moon and back on Pan Am. And then, of course, that final extraordinary journey through the Stargate. And if those don't work, then the whole film doesn't work. To pick a more recent film, not such a huge fan of this, but I did think it was very effective, as the Blade Runner sequels, which I can never remember the year. Is it 2049?
I still haven't seen it, so
yeah, it's very good. I think it's a little bit lost in some of its philosophical conundrums, but again, to evoke that world and to make that part of the storytelling takes money, and you can't tell that same story if you're limiting yourself to people talking in rooms.
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Whilst a lot of so my worry is just, it seems like it's just sequelitis at the minute, and I don't know how companies and studios are going to be able to get back from that. Like you say, aside from a few low budget sleeper hits, I can't see anything springing out of the mist, so to speak. The
other problem that Star Trek has got,
no, go for it.
The other problem that Star Trek's got is it is now being made by old fans for old fans. Now, even something like Prodigy, which should be used to attract a whole new generation of fans because it's kind of aimed at 10 to 12-year-olds, has characters like Janeway and Chakotay in it who were on television long before the target audience was born, but they're put in there to appease the parents. But the thing starts eating itself. So what I did like about Discovery was, apart from references to Spock, it just said, yeah, we're just going to go in a whole new direction. There's going to be a bunch of characters you've never seen before, a bunch of situations you've never seen before. It doesn't matter whether you've seen the old show or not, you can jump on board here. Except you can't, because it's all got subtitles. But I think that was the good thing for me about Discovery. That was what I found appealing about it. So listen, I love watching Strange New Worlds because I'm a fan. But Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks, and now to a certain extent Prodigy, are all love letters to the 60s and 90s shows, which is great. But where's the new Star Trek that's going to get people in for the first time? Or are they expected to catch up with 700 episodes of the old shows before they start watching the new ones?
So with that in mind, then, when Discovery was first being released, I remember people feeling that the Orville sort of was taking
Yes.
that more of classic Star Trek style. So I have you seen the Orville at all?
Yes, I have. I rather
Yeah,
like the Orville, but the Orville's a funny one because it basically began as What If Star Trek, but the tone was Family Guy. And then
yep,
they never really committed to that. So it was like a slightly languid episode of Star Trek with like 5 Family Guy-esque jokes per hour-long episode. And then what they seemed to discover is they actually liked doing the Star Trek stuff more and more and more, and did the Family Guy stuff less and less and less. So it became less its own thing, but whatever it was becoming was actually really good science
yeah.
fiction, or really good storytelling,
I completely
and
agree.
doesn't require you to have watched 700 episodes of Star Trek to appreciate it.
Exactly, and I feel with franchises and lots of IP sequels and things like that is a lot of people are just watching these films for references to other things, whether it's a Marvel film or a Mario or Sonic film. It's all these nods to grander universes and stuff like that 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 they think everybody wants to see, and not just a condensed story that makes you think and feel and things like this. Do you think there is room in the world for a new Star Trek? You say that people making Star Trek now are the old people for the old people. That may be a misquote there, but do you think there is enough room for a new sort of universe, so to speak?
I would hope so. I think the one thing that has been proven over the years is Star Trek is very, very hard to kill. People were trying to kill it as soon as it finished its first season, and nobody's ever succeeded. But I do think at some point someone's going to have to do a more significant reboot and just cut ties with previous continuity, cut ties with looking backwards, and find some new corner of the Star Trek universe to tell some brand new stories in, because we're never going to run out of stories to tell, and we can never run out of new characters because humans are infinitely variable. But this recycling will be limiting, and it becomes insular, and it will eventually collapse in on itself, is my fear.
And you mentioned a new corner of the universe. The universe is pretty big, so I hear.
Yes,
So I
exactly.
would hope they get there eventually. So I just out of curiosity, what sort of things have you been watching lately that you would recommend to people?
I don't know if I'd recommend it, because I've heard other people go, God, this isn't the show I thought it was going to be at all. But I've been really enjoying Agatha all along. And I
Okay.
didn't have any preconceptions about what it was going to be, except that I did watched and enjoyed WandaVision. And I think the first couple of episodes are a bit of a tone whiplash. But I love the cast. Lots of people there I was already familiar with, like Patti LuPone, who's Broadway legend, or Sashir Zamata, who I remember really enjoying on Saturday Night Live. And Catherine Hahn, who's as good as ever. Aubrey Plaza, always a pleasure. And I just think it's really good fun, and I don't know where it's going, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm having a ball with it.
Oh,
Only Murders in the Building, I think, also goes from strength to strength. Again, that's a completely new idea, completely new sandbox to play in. It wasn't based on any existing IP. It was just, the story I love about that is that Steve Martin was trying to develop it and had this idea of these 2 old guys who would do a podcast together and solve murders. And he was talking to Martin Short about it and saying, yeah, we're working on the script, but I have no idea who should play these 2 guys. And Martin Short just went, Steve, we're old.
Sometimes the planet's just a lie like that.
Yeah. And then someone
you-
said you kind of want some hot new young talent in it, so they cast. I can never remember her name. I call her Megan Fungible. What is her name? It's Selena
gosh.
Gomez.
I could name
Yeah.
5 of her songs, but sometimes that just comes out of my head.
Yeah.
So let's get it back to why you're here, Red Dwarf. If this is covered in the book, then please just tell me that people should go and view the book. But your introduction to Red Dwarf, was it something that you just watched on TV and it slowly mounted up from there, or were you a late bloomer to that, so to speak?
No. So it came out in 1988. I would have been about 15, and I was, as well as being a science fiction fan, I was a big comedy fan. So the most exciting program on TV, bar none, for me at that age was Saturday Live, which was the show that made stars of Ben Elton, gave and Harry Enfield, gave early platforms to Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie. Lots of stand-up comedians did their first TV gigs on Saturday Live. And it was 2 hours on Channel 4 late on a Saturday night, and it was live. And it was so exciting. And in the playground on Monday morning, I would be talking to my friends about who we'd seen on Saturday Live, who was going to be hosting it next week, and so on. So I knew Craig Charles from Saturday Live, I knew Chris Barry from Saturday Live, I knew Norman Lovett from Saturday Live. So the idea that they were all going to be on a TV show together, and it was going to be a science fiction comedy, was like, oh yes, sign me up. This is going to be brilliant. And I just really enjoyed those early episodes. And then it started, I think from series 2, started taping them off air. And I didn't think I quite got as far as making detailed catalogues, but I would have them on the shelf neatly labelled. I remember telling everybody when it came out for series 3 that everybody had to watch it, and then actually being a bit disappointed by the first episode of series 3 backwards, which is another one where a lot of people love that one. Again, I don't want to spoil your enjoyment of it, but for me that's one of the ones where the cast have become a bit genericized, and it's the planet that's supposed to be funny. So if you find the sight of footage being run backwards terribly funny, then this is the episode for you. But if you don't, which I don't really, then you have to make do with this slightly kind of sanded off versions of the characters. Like, I don't know how well you know the series, but stuck on Backwards Earth, Crichton and Rimmer managed to make a living as the sensational Reverse Brothers because they could do things like drink a glass of water forwards, which to this audience is extraordinary. Okay, fine. But why isn't Rimmer being a terrible diva about this? Why is Rimmer enjoying success, which is the thing that Rimmer never does? Why isn't he finding some way to screw it up? So that could be happening to any one of the cast and it would be the same, which is really not what I'm turning on Red Dwarf for. It's these 4 guys and their individual foibles that I think make the whole thing work, and they're just not there very much in that episode.
No, I agree, especially with that episode. I never thought about it that way. Because I do think the whole nod null sort of concept can be done well, but perhaps just done a little bit differently to what we saw in that episode.
It's also done very inconsistently in that episode, which I do not like.
Yes.
But then the next episode is Marooned, which is an absolute masterpiece, which is all about exactly who Lister and Rimmer are, because they are just trapped together. And that's one which succeeds with very little in the way of special effects because it's just 2 men in a room. But what they're talking about really matters because it might be the last conversation they ever have.
The more we talk about it, I just think I love character progression and stories. Yeah. That's the reason why I watch most TV shows, I think.
People like people. People are fascinating.
Exactly.
The great improv practitioner Keith Johnston said, "Drama is watching one person changed by another."
I don't think truer words have ever been spoken, really. Yeah. So you were recording them on your VHSs, you were putting them nicely in a line, and then it just grew from there, I assume.
Yeah, and I was struggling to remember as I was writing the book how much of series 7 and 8 I watched, because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kind of came off the production line more or less once a year, the way that successful shows do, and then for various reasons there was quite a big gap between series 6 and series 7. And series 7 and 8 are the ones which fans now tend to look back on with the least fondness, although they got incredibly high ratings for BBC Two shows, not least, I think, because they were such a long time coming. And I was struggling to remember, I definitely remember watching the first one of Series 7, Ticket to Ride. I can picture exactly where I was when I was watching that. But I don't know how many of 7 and 8 I saw first time round. And I don't think I'd watched all of the Dave shows until I did this big rewatch for the book. And I'm really pleased I did, actually, because that's the other thing to say about Red Dwarf. I think there's not a lot in that the end of the BBC era that I really enjoy, but I think there's some terrific shows in the Dave era. And yes, it is falling back on what we've just been talking about, which is it's a show that's now got an aging fan base, and it's pandering to that fan base a bit. But fans don't mind a bit of servicing every so often. And there's enough new stuff in there as well. There are quite a few episodes in the Dave series whose chief purpose is to call back from episodes that first went out 30 years ago.
It's just the old man in the rocking chair in the corner. They just is this a good one? Yeah, that's what you should write. So, Tom, thank you for your time. You are a bigger Red Dwarf fan than I am, and I'm a pretty big one. So before we go, please tell us a bit about your book.
Yeah, so as I said, it is the first half of what I hope will be a definitive work, except of course that there are rumours of a new series or some new specials coming, in which case it won't be definitive, but that's only good news as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, you get a complete episode guide, my thoughts on the episode, star ratings, TV ratings. I also check off things like best special effect, worst special effect, best gag, influences and rip-offs, continuity is for smegheads, and of course that Rimmer's a solid guy, where I just note a few of the things that crop up a few times where having a non-corporeal character doesn't entirely make sense. Again, I don't want to spoil the episode for anyone. It doesn't spoil the episode for me, even having noticed it, but how is it possible for Rimmer to smell camphor wood with nasal receptors made only of light?
Makes you think.
Makes you think. So you get all that and more in Red Dwarf, Discovering the TV series, available now wherever books are sold.
Perfect. Thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll speak again when the second book comes out, whenever that may be.
Sometime next year.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Craig. Cheers.